Hi Year 7. Okay, today you're going to be learning about the Boscastle floods. This will be the last lesson in your rivers topic before we move on to learning all about coasts. So hopefully today, by the end of the lesson, everybody should be able to understand that rivers do flood from time to time. Those people that are working on a higher level of band C should be able to tell us a little bit about why they flood. So that means the causes, and they'll be able to tell us a little bit about the effects and the responses, so what people did about it. And for people working at the top level, we'll be able to link this to Boscastle. They'll be able to explain the physical causes of the flood. That means natural things. They'll also be able to give us the human causes of the flood. And they'll be able to talk about the impact that the flood had on people and what they have done in Boscastle to try and stop it from happening again. To start off with, I want you to pause this slide and work through the quick quiz. When you've done that, unpause it to see whether or not your answers were correct. 3, 2, 1, pause. Okay, and here are the answers. So you might want to very quickly pause the slideshow again now and mark off your answers. Don't forget, don't put crosses when you got things wrong. Actually correct your answers so that you're actually learning something rather than putting crosses everywhere. When you've done that, move on. Okay, so a little bit about Boscastle. Boscastle is in England. It is a village, and as you can see from where the letter A is on the map, it is on the coast. Some of you may have even been there on holiday. It's a beautiful, picturesque village, and it's on the southwest coast of England. You can see from the map underneath, it's not a particularly big place. Got a few main roads going into the area, but it's a very small settlement, nothing in comparison to somewhere like Nottingham. What I'd like you to do now is have a look at this photo and work your way through this ideal analysis. In your book, I want you to identify what you can see in the image. So make a list of all the things that you can see. Then, underneath, describe what has happened. So look for clues in the picture, say what's happened. Then try to explain why this might have happened. Use some of your own knowledge to do this. And then think about whether or not this is likely to happen in other parts of the world. If you think it is, say why. If not, say why. And then write down a few ideas on what kind of impacts you think this flood that we can see in the picture would have had. Before you do your ideal analysis, you might want to watch the YouTube clip. You'll need to go back to your team's lesson and access the link. This shows you a little bit about what it looked like when the flood raced down the valley through Boscastle. You should spend at least 10 minutes on this activity. Pause this now and do those tasks. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is make a copy of this spider diagram. I suggest you use a whole page in your book for this. You might want to turn your page so that it's landscape instead of portrait. And then you're going to add information on the following slide to the correct area on your mind map. So your mind map should look like this to start with. So I suggest you pause this slide right now and write out your mind map so that you are ready for the information to go on it. I suggest you write quite small and definitely use a whole page. Okay, you're now going to see a list of lots and lots of different statements, and you've got to write the statements onto the correct place. So it might be that you read a statement and it's telling you a natural cause of the flood. So you would then write the statement onto your natural causes branch. It might be that you read something and it's about another cause of the flood that was perhaps to do with humans. For example, we often build on floodplains, which is a silly thing to do, and that can make flooding worse. So therefore you'll write those answers onto your human branch. You might read some things that are just about effects, things that happen because of the flood. For example, if a house gets destroyed, that's an impact, that's an effect. So you'll add that onto your effects branch. And finally, you might write about the way people responded during the flood or after the flood. For example, people trying to rescue people would be a response. So I need you to read through the statements on this following slide. Add these, each one of them, onto your spider diagram. This will probably take you at least 20 minutes. Pause this slide now. Okay, a little bit on how flash floods occur. And this is what happened in Boscastle. In Boscastle, it rained and rained and rained, and a lot of rain fell onto the ground throughout a number of months. So the ground was full of water. It was waterlogged. And then it gets to the point where the rain cannot soak into the ground because the ground is full. So therefore it runs over the surface, straight down the valleys into the rivers at the bottom. And the rivers rise dramatically and very, very quickly, and they burst their banks and the floodwaters spread out. And that's what happened in Boscastle. It's such a steep, hilly area, and the village of Boscastle is in the valley. And because it had rained for a number of months and the ground was fully saturated, when it then rained again, there was nowhere for the water to go except down into the valley and flood those rivers. That's called a flash flood because it happens in a flash. 1 minute people were sat around at a nice little trickling stream, and 2 hours later the entire village was being damaged by a ferocious flood. So in terms of your mind map, these would have been some of the answers that you would have had on your different branches. So we've got the physical causes are all up there in the top left. So we had 75 millimetres of rain falling in just 2 hours. We had very narrow valleys, which meant that they acted as funnels, increasing the water speed. We had that the ground was already full of water. We had that the valley is steep. And because there's lots of streams in the area, there's obviously a lot of water. And the rocks that Boscastle is built on are impermeable, meaning water can't pass through them, so therefore it goes over the top. So they were all the physical causes of the flood, nothing to do with humans. It's all totally natural. In the bottom left, we can see some effects from humans. So you might have put down the flood walls that they had built. They weren't high enough for this kind of flood. That made the flood worse. Also, humans cut down many trees on the moors. So therefore, if they've cut the trees down, the trees are no longer there to be able to suck the water up and use it, which means more water can get to the rivers. And finally, the sewage and drains in Boscastle are really old, so they can't take enough water. So those would have been the human causes. Then we look to the top right of your brainstorm, and we have some of the effects, like 75 cars, 5 caravans and 6 buildings being washed out into the sea, and hundreds of homes and buildings destroyed. Another impact would be the 2-metre high wall of water rushing through the village, trees being washed down the street by the river, 3 shops completely destroyed. These are all effects. And then finally we move on to the responses, what they did about it. So we had residents being airlifted by helicopters, and we had plans to help improve the response if a similar flood happened again. So your mind map should have looked something a little bit like that. Let's move on. A finishing task for you now is to write a short paragraph to explain whether you think human or physical causes of the flood were more important in the Boscastle flood. So in other words, do you think that the flood was caused naturally by nature, or do you think mankind made it worse? Or do you think it's a bit of both? Have a go at writing a paragraph now in your book to explain which you think was the most responsible for causing the floods in Boscastle. If you get finished, I suggest you write a newspaper broadcast all about the effects. Once you're also finished, you can then tell your teacher in your Teams app. Cheerio, folks. Thanks for listening.